Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural commentator. And today we're going to be looking at a book called The Deficit Myth. I'm working my way through this book right now as we speak, and I've already done an outline of it, and I've thought quite a bit about what it contains, especially the first 4 or 5 chapters. And I think I grasp it enough to basically explain why this is not a good idea. It's called The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, an economist. And this is explaining what is called the MMT, or modern monetary theory, and how we should go about working with budgets and deficits in the federal government, and why we shouldn't worry. The book actually says we shouldn't worry about the deficit. We shouldn't worry about so-called deficit spending. We shouldn't be worried about a debt, national debt. Basically, she says this does not really matter because we have our own money. It's called sovereign currency. The United States has its own money, and it can print its money whenever it wants to, and it can basically control the entire money structure of the United States. And so we don't have to worry about running up huge deficits because we're only owing money to ourselves when we print money. And this idea on its surface sounds absurd, and it actually is absurd. And its advocates are basically trying to say to us, we can actually have our cake and eat it too. And they're basically saying, yes, money does in fact grow on trees because trees produce wood, wood produces paper, and we can print paper money anytime we want to, whenever we need that money. So she goes on and tries to explain how this, quote, theory will work, but I have some criticisms of it, and I think every Christian and anyone who wants to see a stable society and a flourishing moral society should reject this idea because it's based on so many bad ideas that I just want to name a few of them and work through this from a Christian perspective. And you don't even have to be a Christian. That's the thing. You don't even have to be a Christian to know that this idea about running deficits and building up the national debt does not really matter because it defies every basic, simple principle of reason that people have operated on for centuries and centuries. So let me jump into some of the reasons why this idea about how we can simply ignore the fact that our deficits are running. I think right now the national debt, the printed or the official national debt is at $32 trillion. Yes, $1 trillion. And that's coming after the United States over the last couple of years because of the pandemic have printed up some $4 to $5 trillion with the stimulus packages and the payment protection plan where they were doling out money to corporations, free money, essentially, stimulus checks to citizens, and spending outrageous amounts of cash to supposedly beat back the virus. But I would have liked to have been a part of the conversation or actually hear the walking us through the steps where the people in Washington came to the conclusion, yeah, let's shut everything down for months and months and months and pay everyone out of our treasury, businesses to stay in business and workers to pick up a paycheck even though they're not working. Yeah, how did they arrive at that conclusion? Let's shut down the whole nation, shut down the whole economy, and yet pay people to not work for that time. That's such an outrageous thing, but we did it. And because we did it, we had to borrow, I think it was $4 to $5 trillion over that time to basically compensate people and to keep the economy going. Okay, so Stephanie Kelton evidently says that's okay as long as you don't see inflation rise too quickly and that unemployment doesn't rise. So you have to keep unemployment in check and inflation in check. And if you can do that, forget about the deficit, forget about the national debt. It doesn't really matter. It's inconsequential. And we can just perpetually run deficits and rack up official debt numbers, but it doesn't really matter as long as the economy is booming. Well, let me just say why that is bad thinking. And I sure hope that we don't incorporate that and basically work with that theory in U.S. government, because it's going to bring our country to destruction. So let me list a couple reasons. So the first one is that it sets a bad example for citizens who don't have to worry about debt by thinking that they can just simply go out and spend irresponsibly even, and it'll all work out in the end. And we've already seen this kind of thinking that our government is giving its citizens during the time of these stimulus checks. I think the first stimulus check that I can recall was when George W. Bush sent out everyone, what was it, $500 or $800 or $600 check back in 2008 during the meltdown, real estate meltdown, and when some of the banks were failing, and he sent out these stimulus checks to everybody. It might have been even 1,000 or so. I can't remember now. But I thought at the time, this is crazy. Sending every person, every adult in our country, sending them $1,000. You know, how can you do that? Well, the printing press. You can print that money up, and it just comes off, flying off the press, and then you just put it in the pockets of people. But that's the kind of thinking that this MMT, modern monetary theory, encourages. In fact, I can remember during these stimulus checks, and the last one was sent by Biden after he took office, they actually tell people, go out and spend this money. We need you. It's your citizen duty to go out and spend. So in other words, they're telling people, as soon as you get these checks, spend it because our economy needs it. What? That's crazy. It's teaching people to spend and be irresponsible and not be frugal and not save and not watch their money. It's just teaching irresponsibility. We see another instance of this as our politicians lean more and more toward this deficit spending, running deficits every year, spending more than they bring in. And this Stephanie Kelton, economist, and people like her encouraging politicians to not worry about the deficit, don't worry about the national debt. It'll all work out in the end as long as you just keep track on inflation and unemployment, and you just spend that printed money and spend that debt in the responsible way, and it'll all be good in the end. And what's happening is we are getting, for example, the latest example of this is the student debt crisis, where these students took on enormous amount of debt. I think the average student debt now is somewhere around $30,000. $30,000 you would take out and basically borrow against your future. And, you know, we always knew that, say, people in the higher paid professions like doctors, surgeons, some of these people would always take out some debt, but because they could make it back up in their higher earning after they graduated from medical school and so forth. But just to encourage students of all fields to go ahead and borrow heavily from the government. And now I think the total student debt is over $1 trillion, $1.3 trillion. And now there's even talk of forgiving all of that. Elizabeth Warren and a lot of the radical left, they just want that whole debt wiped out. Again, this is encouraging irresponsibility. And this modern monetary theory, when it says, oh, forget about the deficits and don't worry about deficit spending and don't worry about the national debt. It's just a statistic. It's just a figure in the computer ledger. don't worry about it. Just go about your business, buying and selling and earning and doing all of the financial activity that we do every day, and just let those numbers fly, let those numbers soar. As long as we keep inflation down and unemployment down, we're good. Well, that is breeding this irresponsibility, and we see it in the student debt crisis. We see it when the government's telling people that they send checks to, stimulus checks, spend, spend, spend. And it's a bad moral example. It's the wrong message we need to teach young people especially, because they're getting this impression that they can do whatever they want to do financially, and then in the end, somebody will bail them out. And that is not the truth, and that's not reality. And so as Christians, we need to remind people God created us to be responsible. And there is plenty in the Scripture that teaches us to not go into debt, heavily into debt, burdening debt, crushing debt. No, owe no man anything but the debt of love. So don't leverage yourself so that if nothing, if nothing goes wrong, then maybe ideally everything goes right and your investments all work out and the sky is always blue and the sun is always out and everything under the ideal situations. But what happens is vicissitudes of life come and then crushes your great plans, and then you're in trouble. And that's what happened in 2008 with the mortgage crisis. And this will happen again in the future, and we cannot teach irresponsible financial activity. The second thing that the modern monetary theory does, that Stephanie Kelton outlines here, that I criticize her for, is it leads to a reckless and foolish spending on our national leaders. It's basically unchecked from reality and encouraging them to basically forget about all the common sense principles of money management. I mean, basically what she's saying in this book and encouraging politicians to follow and encouraging economists and encouraging the government to basically overspend, spend more than they bring in. As an organization, the government brings in a certain amount through taxes. They bring in a certain amount through all kinds of other different activities, and that is their income. But what Stephanie Kelton and these MMT theorists are saying is don't limit yourself to tax revenues and other legitimate income-producing activities. Go ahead, print money, create money, and deficit spend. Spend more than you have available. And as long as you watch inflation and unemployment, and you throw this money at the right areas in the economy, everything's going to be fine. Well, another curious thing about that is that this has never, ever worked anywhere that it has been tried. Whenever governments, wherever you might think of, whatever case you can look at, whenever they just start printing their money as a means of solving the national problems, whatever it is, it's always gotten them into trouble. We can look at Venezuela right now. We can look at all of these other nations. Name one that has actually done this and actually benefited from it long term so that their economy is sound and solid right now and they're just going on and doing everything she's saying to do. Name one country that's doing that. No, it's an experiment. She has a theory and she's saying this will work, guys. We've got to try this. The problem is she's experimenting with the entire nation of the United States or any other country that has sovereign currency that might want to try this. Right now, the dollar is the the global standard for currency. I think more countries use the dollar as their basic currency of exchange than any other currency, but that may change. China is trying to step up and be that main currency. And so we may actually, in the years ahead, lose our status of the world's currency in the dollars. And that will change all kinds of things. And so we don't want to encourage politicians to go on this reckless spending binge, spend money like a drunken sailor. There's no accountability in this because there's always some good project to put money towards. And if you have a printing press and you can print more money, you're going to do that, especially if you believe that nothing bad ultimately will happen as long as you don't do that too much. Well, how do you know when that point is that you've done it too much? Well, then it's too late. And runaway inflation, and people are complaining, and you've messed everything up through economic manipulation, like this is basically advocating. It's a manipulative way to do that. And that, I said before, it violates the basic principles of financial rules. I mean, and she says in her book, she says we have to stop looking at the national debt and the national government as if it were a household, because in a household, you can't just keep on heaping up debt. You can't keep using credit cards, running up credit card debt, because eventually there's going to come a time when everything will collapse and you'll have to either declare bankruptcy or you'll have to sell everything off, and it's just disaster financial. You can't do that in a household, but she says you can do that when you're a government and you have control of the printing presses and you control the money. You can get away with all of this. Now that flies in the face of thousands of years of not only just common sense, but basic laws of responsibility. No, you just can't keep spending money more than you're bringing in and think that everything will stay okay. It won't. So again, we have inherited all kinds of financial wisdom from the past, including from the Bible, but also just wise people like Benjamin Franklin, be a lender, but not a borrower be. That was his famous line. A penny saved is a penny earned. All of this kind of folk wisdom that we've learned and parents pass down to their children to try to teach financial responsibility. This monetary theory, modern monetary theory, Stephanie Kelton is outlining in her book here, is basically just undermining all of that and says, no, there's all kinds of different new rules that governments can get away with. And we need to not worry about debt and not worry about overspending and all of these other radical ideas. Yes, we've all understood that, for example, in times of crisis, in times of war, in national emergencies, yes, there are times when one needs to do things like deficit spend, take on extra debt burden for a short-term crisis. But then once that crisis has passed, then you go about quickly trying to get your financial house back in order and get it sound and safe so that then whenever the next crisis comes, yes, you then are in a position to take on, say, deficit spending or crisis debt and get through that crisis. So businesses do that all the time. Families do that all the time too. And this is how nations have done this and utilize this on a short-term basis, yes. But to do what Stephanie Kelton is saying is it's not a short-term basis. You perpetually run deficits. You perpetually borrow. You just keep running up the national debt. You don't even worry about how big the national debt is. And you just go on from there, go forward, and just forget about these large astronomical numbers that are building up. You just simply look at a number of key economic areas like unemployment and inflation. And if you look at those and keep those in check, then we're good to go. No, that flies against all common sense and all the basic wise principles of money management. And I don't buy the fact that you can throw out basic financial common sense and get away with it. You can't. There's going to be a day of reckoning. Now, when I look at her book and what she's advocating, you have to know who she is. She was an advisor, economic advisor, to the candidate Bernie Sanders when he was running for president. So she is a leftist. She is a liberal. She is a actual kind of a democratic socialist. If she's working for Bernie Sanders, she's a socialist. She likes big government. She thinks big government needs to be used more and gotten bigger and take on more responsibility and take on greater sectors of the economy and greater control over the human lives. And she has all kinds of socialistic ideas for what this modern monetary theory might do. And that gets to the real heart of what this really is. The modern monetary theory is a way of redistributing wealth in a nation, because she is confusing money with wealth. She thinks that money and wealth are basically the same. And she's saying that if you can control the money, you can basically decide who's going to get more of the wealth and who's going to benefit from it. And so what running up these large debts and deficit spending, what that does is you will have inflation. And when you have inflation, you are basically watering down the value of the dollar bill. And when you water down the value of the dollar bill, that means that people who have money, it becomes worth less and less because you have more dollars floating around in society, making the dollar not buy as much as it would before all this money was printed and pushed into the system. So basically, you're taking you're taking wealth from people in the form of a hidden tax called inflation, and you're redistributing that wealth to other sectors of the economy and to other people in the society, and you're redistributing and reshuffling wealth. That's what this does. That is the basic underlying principle of the modern monetary theory. It's a redistribution of wealth. And it's a way of getting wealth from people who have money into the hands of people who don't have as much money. And it's a sneaky way because it's a hidden tax. It's an inflation tax. Now, the government has a tricky way of measuring inflation. And they've changed the way they measure inflation today as opposed to 30, 40, 50 years ago. They changed the categories that they measure. So when the government says, oh, we only have 4% inflation, you can't actually believe that figure because of the way that they measure these things. At the time that the government, the administration, was saying that inflation is like 5%, and it's not very high now, I was going to the store and buying food every week and realizing that what the food I buy has gone up dramatically. At one point, the eggs were like $4.50 a dozen, and gas prices were over $4, and bread has risen 50% in the last year or so. And so I was seeing the prices for what I pay for items at the register, and I was saying to myself, I don't care what your figures say inflation is, I'm seeing prices increasing. So you can claim that there is no inflation and it's not rising, but I can see it with my own eyes with the money that I have to spend to buy food, for example, or gas. So be wary of the government when they come out with these inflation numbers. They're not very accurate. So inflation is a way that this modern monetary theory will take wealth from people that have money and redistribute it into those areas of society that they think need more funding and wealth. And they do it through that hidden tax of inflation. And this is exactly what will be taking place with the modern monetary theory, including higher taxes. If you look at some of her proposals, she wants a lot of government control over almost every aspect of the economy. She wants tighter control by the government of the economy to manage it in the way and the vision of the administration and the political leaders. Take the freedom of the economic exchange from citizens and put it into the hands of the politicians and policymakers. So she's a socialist. She wants this totalitarian mega state government to be able to run deficits, print money, and basically take over the economy of the country and have rule over it. And the goal is to redistribute the wealth of this country into the proper balance she and her visionaries want to see. So this is something that is very socialistic. It's very communistic even. And to have someone like this economist actually explaining it right in the open and saying, don't worry about the deficit, don't worry about the national debt. That doesn't really matter. They're just computer figures, entries anyway. It's all done on the computer accounting. Just let the printing presses roll out the dollars. As long as this, and this are okay in the economy, you can print as much as you want. Everything will be fine. And life will be good. No. There's going to be a day of reckoning, and everybody knows that. Everybody knows that you just can't keep running deficits every year in the budget. Whether you're a household or a government or some organization or a corporation, you just can't get away with that. And everybody knows that the government cannot just keep printing money whenever it needs it, because there is going to come a day of reckoning, and every single experiment in that has shown it. So this book is outrageous, actually. The modern monetary theory, the deficit myth, modern monetary theory, and the myth and the birth of the people's economy. The people. So she's claiming to speak for the people, but I don't think the people want the government to control so much of the economy. I think she's speaking, supposedly speaking for the people, like the communists always do and the socialists always do. They always claim that they're the People's Republic of China and that kind of thing. They're always claiming noble, lofty goals, but it's the same old thing. Well, I hope that's been a helpful review of this disaster of a book, The Deficit Myth. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.